Good afternoon to all of you. Myself Aruna Mushtaq. I am from Aligarh Muslim University, and the title of my paper is Commercial Relations between India and China from 1280 to 1500. India and China, the two densely populated countries of the world, had political, commercial and cultural relations since ancient times. The two nations are also geographically connected to each other. Before the fascination with the New World treasure began, the most exciting destinations for merchants around the world was trade with India and China. Besides trade, Buddhism also brought these countries of Asia close to each other. The Buddhist missionaries of India were the most active agents in uniting these two countries by cultural ties. If the Sino-Indian relations from the 1st to 12th century primarily revolved around Buddhism, but from the 11th century the relations between the two were mainly dominated by trade and commerce. While tracing the early contacts between India and China, we find references about people called Chinas in ancient Indian literature. South China, however, seems to have come into contact with India a little later and in an independent way. However, by the 13th century, a new era of commercial relations between India and China began between India and China. Chinese did not directly participate in the Indian Oceanic trade before the accession of the Sung dynasty of South China, who ruled between 916 to 1279. Some scholars are of the view that there is no clear evidence that they sailed to West until at least the end of 12th century. It seems that after 10th century, Chinese merchants and traders had become aware of the benefits of having direct trade relations with West, including India. A common Chinese proverb stated that once the Governor-General of Canton passed the sea gates, he was the owner of 30 million cash. The concern which the Sung emperors showed in encouraging and regulating the overseas trade of China points not only to the revival of Canton as a commercial city, but also to the emergence of new city centers such as the Zaitan. They tried to find out new ways to strengthen their economy. They sponsored massive shipbuilding and harbor improvement projects. Even after the Mongol conquest of China in 1280, the empire's maritime connections seem to have been strengthened rather than weakened. In India, these centuries were also marked by changes which were positive for Sino-India trade relations. Trade was conducted through land as well as by sea, but the mountain system formed by Himalayas, the great plateau of Tibet and the range proved most formidable barriers to direct communication between India and China by land. So in this backdrop, sea routes were mostly preferred. This is also confirmed by some facts, like Chajuki also speaks of the preference of the sea routes over land when he says it's been said that from Annam there exists land communication with India, but as Dharma, the first Buddhist patriarch in China, came by sail all the way to Canton, we may draw the conclusions that this sea route is more feasible one to follow. Hence, trade between India and China during the period of our study was conducted mostly through sea routes, and the ports which the ships visited while going towards China were of Sumatra, Java and Champa. From 13th century onwards, junks and dhows, two types of vessels, dominated the Indian oceanic trade. Dhows mostly played on the western sector, while as the junks dominated the eastern sector of Indian Ocean. Such was the reputation of junks that none of the 13th and 14th century merchants and traders thought of sailing to and from China in any vessel other than junks. All the travelers agreed on the very large size of Chinese junks, and this has recently been confirmed by archaeological evidences. The West Indian ports where Chinese merchants and ships used to visit frequently like Toulon, Calicut and Ille. The ports and cities of China which were visited by Indian merchants and acted as centers of commercial hub in this trading network were Zaitan, Canton, Kinsey and Peking. In China, trade was also conducted under the guise of sending tributes to foreign countries. The Confucian ideal of Chinese emperor as the rightful supreme ruler of the world, the unique bearer of the mandate of heaven, meant that he should not only govern directly the central land of China, but also receive a formal homage and payment of tribute from the kingdoms of outer barbarians in recognition of his permission. Hence, it was very important for Chinese emperors to ensure that tribute-bearing missions frequently arrived from foreign countries and especially for a place to heighten the emperor's glory. In this backdrop, the king of China sent an embassy to Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Many precious items were exchanged between the two. Sultan of Bengal in 1414 also sent a tribute to the Chinese Emperor Yanglo. Tribute includes African giraffe, which was held in great esteem at the emperor's court, where it created a sensation. It's considered a major reason behind dispatching the great Chinese maritime expedition to Africa in the early 15th century. While examining the commodities involved in Sino-India trade, we find that China porcelain was much valued in India. The introduction of silk into Syria, Mediterranean countries of Europe and later on India intruded into the Chinese monopoly of silk. Porcelain, however, remained exclusively the Chinese monopoly. There was a widespread belief in Asia that the pale sea green celadon ware of China could reveal the presence of poison in food, so kings and nobles mostly preferred to use these utensils. Batuta was offered food in Chinese porcelain during his journey from Multan to Delhi. Chajuki, while referring to the vessels leaving China, says greater part of commodity consists of ceramics, the small pieces packed in the larger till there is not a crevice left. Annually, a large number of porcelain selling merchants used to visit India. Chajuki mentions that they used to divide the space of ships among themselves and store goods therein. As to India's own exports, China imported a lot of paper from Malabar ports. In fact, Malabar was called the paper country by medieval travelers. Each Chinese junk was indeed of great size that they were capable of carrying 5,000 or 6,000 baskets of paper with small ships attached to them carrying 1,000 baskets each. While analyzing the custom duties, we find that there was no uniform taxation system and hence the demand of custom duties varied from one port to another. Custom duties form the important source of income for state and kings accumulated huge amount of wealth from foreign merchants in the form of taxes and merchandise. So to conclude, we can say that the period from 13th 15th century was a golden period of Sino-India commercial relations. It was actually from 13th century when Chinese started directly participating in the Indian oceanic trade. It was during these centuries that for the first time we find Chinese junks coming to Indian shores in large numbers. China was at that time the commercial hotspot which attracted the merchants and traders across the world, including India. India's trade with China was more in volume and value than its trade with West. China was chief consumer of Indian spices during the period of our study. It was in the backdrop of change that took place in China from the second half of the 15th century that Chinese junks came less frequently to Indian ports, and then final blow to their participation was given by the arrival of Portuguese.
Good afternoon, everyone. My topic is Thailand's war on drugs, concern and challenges. So the war on drugs is a phrase used to refer the government-led initiative that aims to stop illegal drug use, distribution and trade by increasing and enforcing penalties for offenders. The movement started in 1970 when Richard Nixon officially declared a war on drugs, stating that drug abuse was the public enemy #1. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan reinforced and expanded many of Nixon's war on drug policies. And in 1984, his wife Nancy Reagan launched the Just Say No campaign, which was an effort to educate children on the dangers of drug use. So, in early 2003, inspired by the America's war on drugs, Thailand's Prime Minister Thaksin launched a zero-tolerance war on drugs in response to increased yaba and to a lesser extent heroin consumption. When we see geographically on the Thailand's location, it's fall in the world's second largest opium production region, the Golden Triangle. It comprises of Myanmar, Thailand and Laos. And Thailand shares its northern border with the insurgent Shan state of the Myanmar. So the Thailand's war on drugs objective was to make Thailand drug-free by December 2003, and the police and military were given quotas for the number of users, traffickers, dealers to arrest. And rewards were provided for those who arrested above their quotas, and drug users were ordered to attain drug treatment by the end of the year. And who did not enroll the treatment voluntarily were imprisoned in the compulsory military detention camps. And the community leader was ordered to compile list of drug users and the dealers to pass on to the police. And villages were rewarded if they achieved drug-free status, a policy reinstated in 2009 Clean and Sealed program. So within 2003, 70,231 people were arrested because they were drug dealers and drug abusers, and over 23 million methamphetamine pills were seized, and over 3,20,000 drug users surrendered to the authorities for treatment. The price of yaba pill, which is the synthetic drug, is doubled in that year, and availability declined significantly. But this resulted only into a short-term drop in the consumption. The limited success was outweighed by significant human rights violations, and unintended consequences fell to this day today. Significantly, an estimated 2,819 people were killed during that war, the war on drugs. And while the police reported the most killings were the result of drug dealers silencing potential informants or from dealers' battle with the police, human rights groups suggested that the majority were extrajudicial killing by the police or the military. And a 2007 investigation by the interim military government suggested that the half of killings had no connection with the drug crime. So in 2009, Human Rights Watch reported that there had been few prosecutions, even fewer convictions, and that many officers implicated in murder and torture had even been promoted. So the threat of imprisonment, torture and death pushed users further underground, and this resulted in the more dangerous consumption such as needle sharing, hurried injection, and a reduction in people presenting themselves for HIV treatment. So drug abuse has been a critical social and public health problem in Thailand for decades. Every Thai government since 1999 to 2016 declared this program a priority on the national security agenda. Yet, all the government strategy and policy embrace strong control and suppression of substance abuse. The number of drug users, quantity of seized drug, prisoners being held on drug charges, and patients on drug continues to increase. More than 10 years ago, the Thai government declared a war on drugs and illegal substance in the hope that one day Thailand would be free of them. Unfortunately, substance abusers increased from 2.5 million in 2007 to 2.9 million in 2016. So methamphetamine, hydrochloride crystal and heroin are being produced by powerful minority groups in Myanmar country that have the potential for unlimited production for the illegal drugs. These tribes in the Shan state of the Myanmar have their own armies to protect their territories and factories producing illegal substance. Meanwhile, West African illegal substance syndicates are actively involved in smuggling and trafficking illegal substance in Thailand across the region. Illegal substance not only posing the physical and mental health threat to the Thai population, but also posing a national security threat to the Thailand. Most of the illegal substance users and addicts were adolescents and the young adults of age of 15 to 24 years. Injection drug use is a high risk factor for the transmission of the human immunodeficiency virus HIV among injection drug user group and their partners. And there are many few strategies in which Thailand is an example in the global illicit drug trade, how to control them, which include the first is the opium poppy eradication program, and the other is the act on measure of suppression of offenders, and the narcotic addict rehabilitation. So now I'm just moving to the another section with these strategies, and so it includes the measure of controlling substance abuse. So there are three types of strategies that Thai government had followed. The first is the supply reduction, and second is the demand reduction, and third is the harm reduction. In the supply reduction, it encompasses the enforcement against dealers and the traffickers, and the seizures of drugs, interdiction, and the crop reduction. And in the demand reduction techniques, it comes the treatment and prevention, and in the harm reduction, it's example like the needle exchange. So when we come to the enforcement against dealers and traffickers, so the measures to suppress drug trafficking networks, including the interdiction of drug smuggling, investigation, tracking and deportation of assets, imposition of tax regulations, and control of precursor chemicals, and cooperation with relevant countries. And the confiscation of drug dealers' assets was among the most powerful of the law enforcement countermeasure, as it took away the belongings as well as the capitals and funds used to facilitate criminal drug activities. So when we talk about the concern, the main concerns are like first the Thailand's war on drugs. The first major concern is the human rights violation, because in the temples, in the mosque and the military camp, they used to tie the drug abuser, they chain the drug abuser in a closed room, they don't give drugs and they suffer. They don't treat them as a victims, they treat them as a criminals. And after that, if they go to the treatment camps, which is the rehabilitation center and run by the government, it is difficult to reintegrate into the society. The first concern. And the second is the overcrowded prisons and treatment camps, because they are overcrowded, no separate rooms, no separate facilities, and they getting with the sexual intercourses, HIV is spreading more quickly in these abusers, and tuberculosis is also, and no medical facility is much better. It's not able to optimal level to take care of these minimum healthcare facility. And the other concern is the supply reduction is it is the more risky to get the drugs, because getting caught by the police and getting in prison. So the supply reduction's negative effect is that the drugs price get high, and when drugs get expensive, the drug dealers get profit instead of the drug abuser are reducing in the numbers. And what the challenges in front of this war on drugs? The first is the unintended consequences, which comprise of the example of the balloon effect, because the Thailand's border security force and the police is the more efficient in controlling and coercive measurements. So it controlled the border, the Myanmar and Thailand border to transit the drugs. So what drug dealers did is shifted to the Laos. So its balloon effect is turning the Laos as a transit country and as a drug addicts country. And there is the major challenge is there is a gap between the policy designing and the policy implementation.
The aim to show how it shaped working class identities. And in the second section, I show that given a depoliticized atmosphere, how workers transgressed to find ways to develop shared experiences and solidarities through leisure. China's opening up in 1978 unleashed market forces not only in housing and industries but also in the realm of leisure. The changes began in the 1980s with the commercialization of public spaces, and in the 1990s with the institutionalization of working hours, in the 1994 labor law to an 8-hour workday and a 5-day work week. According to Article 3 of the Regulations of the State Council on the Hours of Work of Employees that was passed in 1994, it says that the employee shall work 8 hours a day and 40 hours per week. Stating the purpose of these regulations, Article 1 quotes that these regulations are formulated according to relevant provisions of the Constitution aimed at rationalizing the employees' hours of rest, work and rest, protecting the employees' right to rest, mobilizing their good initiatives, and promoting the socialist modernization of the country. Although this was not the first move to codify leisure time in China, the rationale for passing this legislation for regulating working hours was a need to identify the need for more leisure time to enhance productivity amongst workers and, more importantly, to increase domestic demand. As market forces began expanding post-1978, consumer thought became an important driving factor behind instituting leisure time in the 1990s. This was more so in 1995 and 1999 when revisions were made to the 1994 Labour Law to introduce double leisure day or a 40-hour work week and long weekends in the form of Golden Week respectively that included 3 7 days off on Spring Festival, May Day and National Day. Thus, although the state had retreated considerably post-1978, allowing space for the entry of market forces, it retained significant control over certain realms of the private sphere, and leisure was one of them. The second aspect that I look at in this section is the commercialization of spaces of leisure and the deprivatization of workers' leisure culture. The growing consumerist culture had an impact on workers' leisure culture. Most importantly, since 2000, the working people's cultural palaces where workers used to earlier spend their leisure time has now been reinvented to adapt them to the needs of the market economy. The affiliation of the WPCPs was to be detached from the trade unions and were to be transferred to the cultural departments of local authorities. This move was crucial as under a corporatist governance regime of the local governments, the emphasis was on generating revenues, and it led to the commercialization of these spaces. Divesting them of their affiliations to the national trade unions was also symbolic, since it meant that these were no more spaces exclusively assigned for the workers but also for the masses in general. It led to a transformation of activities from a socialist proletarian culture to include activities that serve the urban public in general. Yet another impact that you see because of the growing consumerism in leisure culture on workers is a spatial differentiation in leisure practices. The exorbitant charges made these indoor facilities of the WPCPs, which were now rented out to catering boxes, discos and ballrooms, virtually inaccessible to the workers who earlier had to pay only a nominal amount to gain access. While the younger and middle class consumers utilized the indoor facilities, the outdoor space was crowded with workers. Thus, the WPCPs have thus changed from organizing workers' leisure to catering to the leisure consumption demands of the city dwellers. If you look at the workers' leisure culture right now, it also reflects a segmented leisure market. Unlike workers, the middle class thronged the bars, dance halls, cafes, discos, bowling alleys, clubhouses or golf courses. Since post-Mao economic reforms have depoliticized leisure, a more commercial leisure culture has been reintroduced to meet the demands of a booming Chinese middle class. The gulf between the haves and the have-nots has separated the urban population spatially in leisure, which was crucial in shaping workers' identity distinct from the middle class. The characterization of certain places as chaotic and occasional crackdown on places such as internet cafes, catering boxes, etc. that were frequented by mostly workers created binaries of healthy and unhealthy leisure, which further facilitated the deepening of the social and spatial divisions within the society. Although not illegal, the urban underclass, that is the workers, who frequented these places were discriminated against. These experiences of discrimination in leisure practices reinforced class divisions and shaped working class subjectivities. The workers developed an identity as against the rich and the middle class whose lived experiences were different from theirs. The socio-economic development of the reform era recasted working class subjectivities where the workers ceased to exist as mere producers. Far from possessing a monolithic identity, workers now possess multiple subjectivities and identities in the form of a producer-consumer. With the deepening urban-rural gulf and the transformation of their role from masters of the enterprises to disadvantaged groups in the city, workers began looking beyond their position in the factory alone. Today, the life in the city is a crucial factor in shaping their subjectivities. It is these motley of factors that shape the subjectivities and influence the way workers respond during moments of struggle. In the next section, I look at how leisure is political and how workers transgress the limits imposed by the state. In his conceptualization of leisure, Chris Rojek reiterates that leisure is political and is never only about rest, play, or recreation. This section reads workers' leisure as a terrain where workers' identities are negotiated and displayed and new relations forged. While the Chinese state and the hegemonic capitalist culture tries to co-opt workers, the workers display an inherent resistance to it. There are several ways through which they resist or penetrate the hegemonizing tendencies of state and capital. Reviving Maoist class discourse by employing collective memory of the past through cultural activities is one way of showing resistance. In the section I have given several examples of how they go about transgressing the boundaries. I'll just mention 2 or 3. In one example, I'm showing how workers, migrant workers, local workers, they gather together in city parks. They sing revolutionary songs. They perform operas of socialist themes or revolutionary themes. The idea behind this is to keep alive the Chinese revolutionary and socialist legacies and transfer it to the newer generations. They even gathered and discussed the Mao Zedong thought. The singing revolutionary songs during leisure time went beyond just singing for leisure, but held a political connotation. In another example, I show how workers in the factory shop floor, they try to reclaim their spaces by taking extended cigarette breaks or just sitting at the shop floor chatting. Basically, they are trying to reinterpret discipline and leisure in their own way. So this was not just a subversion of their space, but also a brazen challenge to the reform attempts by the new reform state and the management that implemented it. And finally, one more example, I show about how workers start writing, they write letters during their leisure time, talking about the difficulties that they face in the factories, or basically sharing their experiences to their family, friends, or fellow workers in another factory. So this was important as a leisure practice because it developed a sense of shared experiences that was crucial in developing consciousness and solidarity amongst the workers. To conclude, the depoliticization of workers' leisure culture in the post-socialist period has created a new worker subject that of a worker-consumer. However, a distinct working class identity as opposed to middle class identity is forged through working class leisure culture owing to a segmented leisure market that creates a distinct spatial segregation. These spaces provide workers the avenue to socialize and build relationships that become crucial, especially during moments of struggle. While the state attempts to curb workers' space to resist, workers found the niches of transgression through their counter-hegemonic practices. The spaces of leisure thus became crucial in shaping class subjectivities among the Chinese workers during the 1990s and the 2000s. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, as well as ladies and gentlemen. क्योंकि मैं बनारस हिंदू विश्वविद्यालय से आया हूँ और कुछ नए जनरेशन के बच्चे हैं, तो मैं शुरुआत में थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी में बोल दूँगा क्योंकि इन लोगों को लग रहा है कि हम लोग कहाँ आ गए हैं. The paper which I am going to present is Salience of Hu Jintao's era in contemporary China. जो हु जिंताओ हैं वो चाइना के शीर्षस्थ राजनीतिक नेता थे. किनसे पहले? अभी जो शी जिनपिंग है उनसे पहले. तो उनके बारे में मैं आप लोगों को कुछ बता रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैं हिस्ट्री के डिसिप्लिन से आता हूँ और हिस्ट्री का डिसिप्लिन हम लोग हमेशा बोलते हैं कि इसमें डिबेट हमेशा चलते रहते हैं. हम लोग नो डिबेट नो हिस्ट्री, नो रिकॉर्ड्स नो हिस्ट्री. तो चाइना का जो पहली पीढ़ी थी नेतृत्व करता थी, आप लोग सभी उनका नाम जानते हैं, माओ ज़ेडोंग. दूसरी जो पीढ़ी थी नेतृत्व करता थी वो थे तेंग शाओपिंग. जो थर्ड पीढ़ी थी उनको हम लोग चियांग ज़ेमिन के नाम से जानते हैं. और ये फोर्थ पीढ़ी है जिनका नाम हु जिंताओ है. तो चाइना एक ज़माने में क्रांति के बारे में जाना जाता था और अभी भी हमारी विषमताएं जो है इसके कारण आप छत्तीसगढ़, झारखंड और वहाँ पर भी कुछ माओवादियों को पाते हैं. तो ये बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग है बिकॉज इन टर्म्स ऑफ नेशन स्टेट्स, इंडिया, चाइना, इजिप्ट, साउथ अफ्रीका, दे आर नॉट ओनली नेशन स्टेट, दे आर सिविलाइजेशन स्टेट्स एज वेल. सो इनकी जो एनालिटिक कैटेगरी होगी जिसपे हम देखेंगे उसको देखने का ढंग अलग अलग है. और हिस्ट्री हम लोग मानते हैं कि इट इज़ मदर ऑफ सोशल साइंसेस. सोशल फिजिक्स इसको कहा जाता है क्योंकि एक तरफ हम लीडर को देखते हैं, दूसरी तरफ मासेस के एस्पिरेशंस को देखते हैं. दोनों को एक देखना होता है इम्पोर्टेंट. अब मैं हिंदी में बात छोड़ कर क्योंकि प्रोफेसर साहब मेरे तरफ देख रहे हैं कि आप क्या हिंदी और अंग्रेजी में बात कर रहे हैं. तो जो हु चिंताओं का पीरियड है, हिंदी में उसको आप चिंता मतलब चिंता समझिए, लेकिन चिंताओं है वो क्योंकि बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट है कि वो ट्रांजिशन पीरियड में चाइना चल रहा है, और इसीलिए जब EHR प्रोफेसर मुकेश कुमार वो बात कहते हैं हिस्टोरियन के लिए, हम लोग के लिए दो बहुत ही इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं। एक E.J. हॉब्सबॉम जब वो कहते हैं द टास्क ऑफ पास्ट इज ए परमानेंट डायमेंशन ऑफ ह्यूमन कॉन्शियसनेस, द टास्क ऑफ हिस्टोरियन इज टू टेल अस दिस सेंस ऑफ पास्ट एंड टू टेल अस द स्टोरी ऑफ ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन। रूपांतरण बताना है, चेंज नहीं बताना है। चेंज को सोशियोलॉजिस्ट पढ़ेंगे, ट्रांजिशन। और दूसरा जो EHR बताते हैं बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट, वो कहते हैं हिस्टोरियन का काम नहीं है कि अतीत के साथ मोहब्बत में डूब जाना, क्योंकि जब आप मोहब्बत में डूब जाएंगे तो उसकी बहुत कमियों को आप नजरअंदाज करें। द टास्क ऑफ, इसीलिए ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, ही हैज टू ऑलवेज हैव ए क्रिटिकल आउटलुक टुवर्ड्स policy making, leadership and all those sort of things. So I'm not going into much of the detail. The main point which I'm trying to make in this period is, it is very important to understand the economic reforms which my previous presenter started. The 1978 is, you can say that some of the analysts say it marks the second revolution of China, because economic reforms वहाँ से start होता है। वो economic reforms ऐसा start होता है कि चाइना आज बहुत नजदीक आ गया है USA. So it has clocked the 7 or 8% of economic growth rate. Therefore, that is very important. कुछ चिंताओं का जो सबसे एपेक्स है वो था 16th Party Congress of Communist Party of China, and the four bullet points which I wish to highlight over here was this 16th Party Congress, which was held in November 2002. The Congress was held when there was no political turmoil in China. Leadership transition took place in peaceful manner, though several months deliberations were held prior to convening of the Congress. The Congress upheld the age criteria of 70 years for holding the party posts. It marks continuity of foreign and economic policies. Finally, the Congress laid down the blueprint for China's future development, which is significant for the growth of socialist economy, politics, culture, and party building, and overall to the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The People's Daily editorial spoke highly of, unquote, quote, the third generation central leadership with Jiang Zemin at the core, which have held high the great banner of Deng Xiaoping's theory and unitedly led the entire party and the people, unquote. So these are the highlights. Another thing was his theory of three represents. Jiang Zemin's theory states that the Chinese Communist Party must represent first, development trend of China's advanced productive forces; second, the orientation of China's advanced culture; third, fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people. So the theory of the three represents goes beyond the Marxist doctrine of class struggle and the limitations of what is called the Deng Xiaoping theory. If Deng Xiaoping theory provides a cause, Jiang's theory provides a method to attain this cause. It allows the Chinese Communist Party to have private business persons as members. It is the theoretical basis on which the CPC can adapt itself to social changes consequent upon dramatic economic changes in China and turn itself from a revolutionary party to a ruling party. Another thing which I wish to highlight before this audience, that it was in late 1980s that Deng Xiaoping and Hu Yaobang decided for future generation leadership there should be four general requirements. First, young, Nyang Hua. Usually they should be in their 50s or preferably 40s. Second, well educated, Chi Shi Hua, defined in terms of being a graduate or its equivalent. Third, specialized in training, Xuan Hi Hua, generally with technical training in science and technology. So this Tsinghua University, which is the sort of like IIT of what we have over here. So most of the leadership, they are educated from this Tsinghua University. Fourth, politically reliable, Gemin Hua, having a period of service in the party and no record, and a radical activist during the Cultural Revolution. So the point which I wish to highlight is that stability is very important for them. They are not going for any major transition which could lead to instability. The overall analysis regarding the composition of the new leadership were that they are graduates from regular universities, 4 of the 9 members of the standing committee graduated from Tsinghua University. They are all professionals and engineers. Almost all of them served as leaders at the provincial or municipal level. And as such, they have gained rich experience in administration and economic construction. In short, they are both technological experts and political leaders. So this is very important, which I wish that I should highlight. Hu Jintao was someone who was, coming from China Youth League. वो एक तरीके से जैसे कांग्रेस के पास NSUI है, बीजेपी के पास ABVP है, वैसे ये चाइना यूथ लीग था. And I was surprised while I was working in Timurti. I came to know because I was going through the photographs. In his capacity as leader of Chinese Youth League, he had visited India earlier as well. So before getting leadership, he had known about India and India's growth story. What are the achievements of this era? Peaceful transition of power was a great achievement. Even during the period of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, transition of power used to be a difficult process and fraught with uncertainties. Furthermore, this process of transition of leadership is in the process of institutionalization. Indeed, this development will bring about stability at the political field. This is the process of institutionalization that in the last Congress we saw how Xi Jinping came at the top. Chiang has made an important step by relying on the concept of collective leadership with the head of party only acting as core. But as of now, Hu Jintao has not been referred as the core. Finally, emphasis has been laid on innovation in ideology and political work. As Chiang stated, to innovate is to keep emancipating our minds, seeking truth from facts and progressing with the times. We have to surpass our forefathers and will undoubtedly be surpassed by posterity. So these are some of the important things. In the foreign policy, I wish to highlight the Taiwan policy. They very much emphasize on one China policy. And the challenge which they think about is about Taiwan. The Taiwan policy will be continuing and emphasize on one China principle. He stated, on the basis of one China principle, let us solve for now certain political disputes and resume the cross-strait dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible. Therefore, the fourth generation leaders are the first not to have been engaged in the communist revolution. Indeed, most of the new leadership suffered during the infamous Cultural Revolution, in many cases served for a time in backward provinces. This experience, coupled with the experience of reaching political maturity under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, certainly lends an air of economic pragmatism to the new leadership. And it is for sure that the process of opening the economy and rolling back the state sector will continue unabated. However, the new leadership will have to balance between Western influences, demands and culture on the one hand, and Chinese nationalism and the nation's confidence in its cultural preeminence on the other. Apart from text, now I wish to highlight two things. In 1990s, the Western analysts, they were talking about China as a threat. And there were many writings even by Indian security analysts about China's strategic culture. And then in China's strategic culture, the preeminent place was given to Sun Tzu. Later on, from 2000, we have seen that in India, what we call Vinamra Shakti or Namra Shakti, soft power. Even the Chinese leadership are emphasizing on their soft power, Confucian and other things. So this is something which is very relevant for India. Not necessarily because both of them are neighbors, both of them are civilization states. The debate will go on to which one is Jada Purana. But it is very important. So even in the case of Western analysis, we have seen that China is no longer regarded as much as threat. Now it is being looked as an opportunity. So it is very important, in conclusion I would say, that Hu Jintao's era is a transitional sort of era whereby when this gentleman comes, he talks about one China dream, Belt and Road scheme, and more nationalist posture. So I thought that I should share some of these things. I'm now open for questions.
Group on China here.
साइडलाइंस में बात करते हैं।
It's an opportunity. Opportunity for
Yes, yes.
और क्या कुछ तो
Yes.
कुछ तो फिर चलना चाहिए।
Yes, yes. After
जनवरी
what?
दिसंबर में शी जिनपिंग का स्टेटमेंट आया था कि ताइवान हमारा ही है, तो क्या मतलब वो जो भी मेजर्स होंगे वो फॉलो करेंगे, तो क्या वो ताइवान के खिलाफ वॉर वेज करेंगे?
देखो मैं बनारस से आ रहा हूँ, इसका मतलब मैं त्रिकालदर्शी नहीं हूँ, मैं ज्योतिषाचार्य नहीं हूँ।
नहीं, जैसे ताइवान के पीएम ने सबसे सपोर्ट भी मांगा, तो उस पे आपको क्या लगता है?
I think see what you are saying is very important.
पॉसिबल है कि मतलब चाइना जब भी इकोनॉमिक इंटरडिपेंडेंस वाला चल रहा है सिचुएशन,
चाइना ने इतना
जाएगा
चाइना थ्रेट सुना है कि वो वॉर नहीं करेगा, मेरा मानना है। लेकिन आप तो जेएनयू से हो ना, हेजेमनी में दोनों चीज होता है, कोर्सिव एज वेल एज कंसेंट। तो वो कुछ ना कुछ कोर्सिव तो करेगा। जब हम लोग कोर्सिव आज 330 में कर चुके हैं, है ना, तो वो कैसे नहीं करेगा? उसकी इकोनॉमी, आप वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री पढ़ो, जिसका भी इकोनॉमिकली उत्थान हुआ है, इंडस्ट्रियल रिवोल्यूशन के बाद एक छोटा सा देश इंग्लैंड, सन नेवर सेट्स इन द ब्रिटिश एम्पायर, उसका वो बोलता था ना। तो जो वर्ल्ड, जो सेंस ऑफ आपकी हिस्ट्री है, विच आई टॉक्ड अबाउट E.J. हॉब्सबॉट, वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री पढ़ने से हम और मुकेश जी तो बहुत ही बुद्धिमान हो गए। लेकिन नोबडी नोज अबाउट फ्यूचर, इसकी गारंटी कोई पंडित जी ही कर सकता है, ज्योतिषाचार्य कर सकता है।
You wanted to say something.
I just wanted to ask, how are civilization states defined? I mean, what qualifies us as a civilization state, and
Sure.
which is
See, you have worked in a university, Denmark. Westphalian order जो है 1648 के बाद जो 30 years war खत्म होता है, तो जो ट्रीटी होती है, उसके बाद नेशन स्टेट को आप कैसे जानते हैं? नेशन स्टेट आर नोन बाय देयर बाउंड्रीज आर सैक्रोसेंट। बाउंड्रीज में आप कुछ करोगे तो कोरियन पेनिनसुला में देखो क्या होता है, हम लोग का जो आइडिया है वो है फ्रंटियर्स में हम अगर बॉर्डर क्रॉस भी करते हैं, अगर मैं कभी कभी भगवान कृष्ण के रूप में गाय लेते हैं उधर चला भी जाऊंगा, तो मैं बोलूंगा कि फिर लौट के आ जाता हूँ, नॉट नेसेसरली समबडी फायर्स अपॉन मी। नहीं, कश्मीर की जो बात है कितनी इंपॉर्टेंट है कि मतलब बॉर्डर के आर पार जो लोगों को आने जाने दीजिए, उसके लिए इतना मिसाइल क्या लगाना? कोल्ड वॉर पीरियड ने तो बता दिया, here was a power USSR, it was competing with USA and it disintegrated like a pack of cards. इसीलिए आप देखोगे सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन तो आप मिलिट्री वाले भी बोलते हैं कि सिक्योरिटी डॉक्ट्रिन में केवल मिलिट्री सिक्योरिटी नहीं है, देयर यू हैव ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी, यू हैव एनवायरमेंटल सिक्योरिटी, वीमेन सिक्योरिटी, चाइल्ड सिक्योरिटी। बच्चे स्कूल में पहले आए तो उसके लिए हम खाना देंगे। हाँ, so that is something which as a student of history we have to remember.
Good afternoon, everybody. My paper deals with the untold chapters of the Greater India, untold chapters of the Journal of the Greater India Society, an overview of Ramesh Chandra Majumdar's contributions to it, a nationalist approach. So we all know that R.C. Majumdar was a very prolific historian and had contributed to almost all the fields of Indian history. Especially he had produced a great number of scholarly works throughout the 20th century in the field of the history writing about the relations between India and Southeast Asia. In this article, I have mainly dealt with his 5 articles and have tried to show his ingenuity as a scholar, as well as the inherent contradictions that basically represent the contradictory aspects of the Greater India studies. So the Greater India study actually tried to portray the glorious past of ancient India, when her influences spread throughout the Asian regions where distinctive cultural traditions were born. The approach was to perceive Indian culture as the principal source of culture by which the receiver cultures, here of course the different Asian countries got influenced. According to this view, Indian cultural norms were imbibed so deeply that the nations situated in various parts of Asia could be seen as the extended parts of Indian subcontinent. Thus, India was claimed to be the mother of the Asian culture, and the Asiatic nations were begun to be categorized as her cultural colonies. In this way, the image of Greater India or an extended India was started to gain preferences from the early 20th century. To study about this matter, the Greater India Society or the Brihattara Bharata Parishad was formed on 14th October in 1926 in Calcutta. And it emphasized to study the legacy of Indian cultural influences over the country situated outside of our geographical frontiers, leading those nations to the threshold of a developed culture and civilizations. This process had a different approach in the sense that it had spoken about only the cultural impact and was free from any approach related with the persuasion of power or forceful political control that had been generally exercised by the Western imperialist nations. And it has already, it is a very general comment to state here that this approach was actually posed as against the criticism of Orientalist scholars about the negative features of, according to their view, the negative features of Indian culture. It is also a well-known fact that this nationalist milieu of the first half of the 20th century had helped to sustain and nurture the notions of the society. The idea of the Greater India reflected the two contradictory aspects of the emerging ideal of Asiatic unity as well as the Indo-Asian humanism. And such international and humanist approach of the Greater India vision received encouragement from the works of Rabindranath Tagore. I am not going into detail of these things. I have already presented this in my article. Thus, the society's formation offered an organizational form in spreading the nationalist thought, focusing on India's peaceful and human cultural interactions. And as a major weapon to propagate this idea, the society published a journal from 1934 to 1959 with an interruption from 1946 to 54. The editors of this journal were U.N. Ghoshal, Kalidas Nag and Nolinakho Dutt. R.C. Majumdar had contributed 5 articles to this journal. His essays had mainly dealt with the political matters. It could be evident from the titles of his 4 works. They included the date of accession of Jayavarman II, King Suryavarman I of Kambuja, decline and fall of the Shailendra Empire, and the struggle between Shailendras and Cholas. His another article, The Malaya, had tried to establish the theory of the prehistoric migration of the Austronesian tribes from India to Malaysia as propounded by the philological researches of the European scholars. But the important aspect of his writing was his effort to establish the fact that such migration indicated actually the antiquity of the connection between India and Southeast Asian countries. They paved the way of the later migrations to and the consequent colonization of the respective places. The theory also sought to establish a linguistic and ethnic unity between the primitive tribes of India like Munda, Khasi, and Mon Khmer, as well as other tribes of Southeast Asia. A significant character of Ramachandra's writing was that they did not deal with the mere political upheavals. In addition to the prevailing views regarding the positions, functions and achievements of the rulers, he posed new questions and had tried to answer them in the light of the recent discoveries. The scientific and critical analysis of the sources is evident from his other article, from his all the articles. He had very ably utilized various inscriptional and literary sources. Epigraphical evidences included the relevant inscriptions found from both Southeast Asian countries and India. While depicting the story of the struggle between the Shailendras and the Cholas, Majumdar had profusely used a wide variety of Chola inscriptions. Regarding literary evidences, we can see mainly the use of the Chinese chronicles, indigenous traditions and contemporary research works by the premier historians like Sedis, Aimoniad, etc. He thoroughly scrutinized the sources and initiated comparative discussions between them. Even many new questions had been raised through the analysis of the sources, and he had tried to solve the confusions. Ramachandra had offered new approaches and provided new information. Like in the decline and fall of the Shailendra Empire, he had tried to trace the existence of the Shailendra rulers till 14th century, though we do not generally find information about the empire after 12th century. His another article, like the struggle between the Shailendras and the Cholas, had shed light on the conflict and friendship between these two notable powers. he had tried to identify the places which the Cholas had claimed to conquer there. In every writing, he had emphatically tried to highlight the extensive spread of the Indian socio-cultural and religious influences. In King Suryavarman I of Kambuja, he had shown the king as proficient in Indian philosophy and literary culture. Though the question that never arose was whether the social reforms introduced by the king retained any feature of the indigenous social structure. It was not surprising, because the writer's main intention here was to show how the king was well versed in Indian literary and philosophical culture. And one more thing, that Majumdar never used any contemporary literary sources or any important historical research blindly. Okay. And Ramesh Majumdar's article represents his sense of historicity, power of critical analysis, and ability to represent interesting historical narratives. In his writings, he had tried to solve questions which had been posed by the then historians. Thus, the readers can always be aware about the various approaches and information of the contemporary times. Simultaneously, inherent piousness of his work cannot be ignored. That he was majorly preoccupied with the effort to establish the inclusive impact of the superior Indian culture over the inferior indigenous cultures of Southeast Asia was evident in his writing. But as it was mentioned before, this mentality was the representative of the general tendency prevalent among the historians of the nationalist era. Even Majumdar's other works, lectures and essays that have been published from time to time, unhesitatingly projected this cultural conquest of Indians over the barbarian locals of Southeast Asia and India's contribution to lead them to threshold of civilization. Moreover, a structural biasness of nationalist historiography to equate Indian culture with that of the Hindu was very much present in his analysis. He had made it clear, like his other fellow historians of the Greater India Studies, that the spread of Indian culture actually meant the spread of the Hindu culture. The arrival of Islam, both in India and Southeast Asia, had hindered the process. But in spite of such general limitations, attention should be given to the competent analysis that had been offered by Majumdar. He himself believed in the scientific use of the sources and emphasized on the duty of the historians to bring out the truth from the past darkness. While highlighting over India's relation with Southeast Asia, he maintained his yardstick like a profound scholar of history. His prejudices reflected the contradictions of the contemporary nationalist milieu, where scholars were caught between their nationalist soul and mind of historian. Ramesh Chandra's works in the pages of the Journal of the Greater India Society and other important independent publications inspired the fellow academicians and future scholars to engage themselves more into the study of this particular subject. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for patience in this panel in the afternoon. So this paper, when I was submitting it, and it's in the session, history of countries other than India, it's always a difficulty when it's about partition, because when you're talking about India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, then how, when does this history become history other than India? And I begin with Manto when he said, at some point he's known to have said that despite trying, I could not separate India from Pakistan and Pakistan from India. Who owned the literature written in undivided India? Will it be divided? Will that be divided as well? And that's why this is a paper on literary representations. So I begin with a quote from Manto. The identity of a migrating people oscillates between two sets of socio-cultural systems. The first belongs to the community or the nation from where they have migrated, and the second to that of the one they have migrated into. The interactions and the resultant conflict between these two sets of inherent and acquired identities constitutes the cultural no man's land, which is the landscape of diasporic writing. In this space lies buried a double treasure trove, amnesia and memory, of success and failures, of tears and smiles. In short, here is the lived experience of not one but two communities. Although this fractured sense of belonging and alienation is a literary trope, that runs through most diasporic fictions. To a large extent, it is also at play in much of what has been called partition literature. Hence, the theme of migration and all that it entails, a sense of loss, dislocation, disbelief, negation, and anger, runs through almost all of literary representations of partition. The other theme palpable in the genre is that of nostalgia for the lost homeland, a deep, all-consuming longing for return, and the sense of being an exile in the new homeland. This is oh, okay.
Yes. I didn't notice it. In the new homeland. This is especially evident in partition literature that focuses on muhajirs, the Indian Muslims who migrated to Pakistan, and their migrations across the newly created borders in 1947, through an emphasis on the long aftermath of the actual dislocations, as well as an exploration of the psychological impact of having to make the choice of moving or staying. This paper seeks to bring out these complexities inherent in literary representations of Muhajir narratives by focusing on a few specific works, both novels and short stories that delve into them. So I look at the two novels by Abdul Samad, Do Gaz Zameen, which has been translated into English as Strip of Land, 2 yards long, and the other novel called Khwabon Ka Savera, Dawn of Dreams. Apart from that, I look at Atia Hussain's English novel, Sunlight on a Broken Column, the short story by Ismat Chugtai, Roots. I focus briefly on Intuzar Hussain, although I do not go deeply into his the trilogy Basti, Aage Samandar Hai, Naya Ghar, and two other short stories by Ibrahim Jali's, A Grave Turn Inside Out, Badiou Zaman, Raman's short story Alien. So I don't know how much time will permit, but I begin with Abdul Samad, the partition, migration, and the Muslims of Bihar in Abdul Samad's writing. Abdul Samad's award-winning novel Do Gaz Zameen, a strip of land 2 yards long, is a literary work set against the expansive historical canvas that spreads across pre-partition Bihar, the riots of 1946, and the partition of 1947, and the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. It tells the tragic tale of the Bihari Muslims who experienced dislocation and alienation, no matter what choices they made. In the story of a traditional, old-fashioned Muslim family settled in Bihar Sharif, trying to cope with and engage with the political changes happening around it, the author has attempted to look at the stereotype that the Muslims were unanimous and united in the demand for Pakistan and the politics of separatism. The household of Altaf Hussain, the patriarch of the family, was divided in his political and ideological loyalties. While the younger son, Asghar Hussain, was a staunch supporter of the Muslim League, his eldest son-in-law, Akhtar Hussain, was an active congressman. The author goes to great lengths to depict the normalcy of everyday Hindu-Muslim relations in the village of Bain, to which the protagonists belong. They were disturbed only by the electoral propaganda of the various political players in the province. And this is a quote from the book. In an aftermath of the recent elections, the atmosphere of the village was filled with the miasma of bitterness. Everywhere an unseen wall stood between Hindus and Muslims. The Congress and the Muslim League had drawn a wedge between the Hindus and the Muslims, both of them falling apart on the basis of communal bias. The Muslim League had departed from India after holding before the people the Shimera of Pakistan. After that, the Hindu Mahasabha had gone from door to door, telling the people about the horrendous consequences of this ill-conceived dream. However, the creation of Pakistan divided not only the Hindus and the Muslims, but also the Muslims themselves. They now had to decide whether to move to Pakistan or to stay back in the land that they had been born in. In the novel, the conflict is played out within Altaf Hussein's household, with Asghar Hussain. While Asghar Hussain makes the choice to migrate, Akhtar Hussain decides to stay on in Bihar. The decision divided the entire household. There were those who wanted to stay but could not, and those who wanted to leave but also could not. Significantly, the author emphasizes that the Muslims believed that the journey to Pakistan would be an easy one, considering that it had become a reality mostly through the sacrifices of the Muslims of the Muslim minority provinces. He writes, the people maintaining that traveling to Pakistan presented no difficulty. It was a straight passage by train. It was only later that the people realized that one had to cross a veritable river of fire to get across to Pakistan. In their imagination, people had regarded it as the mythical straight and narrow path leading to paradise, but in reality it had turned out to be something quite different.
While Asghar Hussain decides to migrate to Pakistan, Akhtar Hussain chooses to stay on in Bihar. However, his idealism is challenged every step in post-partition. At every step in post-partition Bihar, he proves to be a failure in politics. His basic integrity and strength of character become the biggest stumbling block in his political career. The character of Asghar Hussain and Akhtar Hussain, the characters of Asghar Hussain and Akhtar Hussain, though ideologically opposite, never stand in opposition to each other. In fact, what is ironical is that the fact their experiences in the homelands of their choice are somewhat similar. I don't know how much time is left. Okay. The novel also brings out through female characters the helplessness of women trapped in social structures where men make all the decisions. The women characters mostly remain in the background of the plot. However, their sense of dislocation and is palpable throughout the novel. For Bibi Sahiba, the wife of Altaf Hussain, it is unfathomable why the creation of Pakistan should create such divisions in her own family. Pakistan, even as it becomes a living reality, is merely a distant, abstract idea for her, something that should not have affected her or those that she loved, and yet with its coming into existence, she witnesses the disintegration of the household. Even as Akhtar Hussain attempts to explain to her the permanence of the boundaries that have been forged by partition, she is unable to come to terms with the fact that her son, Sarwar Hussain, who has migrated to Karachi, will never return to stay for good, and she wonders, and I quote, "But how can he leave his home? He was born here and he grew up here. His house and lands are here. His forefathers and fathers are buried here." The sequence of migration does not stop with partition. If anything, it was only the beginning of a series of dislocations for the Bihari Muhajirs. This is an aspect that has been highlighted by Samad in the novel. Hence, even though Akhtar Hussain did not migrate to Pakistan and held on to his belief that India was as much a home for Muslims as it was for the Hindus, his son Hamid, frustrated by the lack of opportunities in India, decides to move to Pakistan, this time to its eastern wing. However, it was only eventually that he comes to realize that East Pakistan was no land of opportunities either. In fact, the words of his maternal uncle, settled there since partition, of which he had initially been skeptical, now seemed to ring with truth. "Hamid Babu, you have come here a little too late to know the real state of affairs. These Bengalis are full of their Bengaliness, and they just don't care for Pakistan, as if it means nothing to them. Fights over Urdu and Bangla Bhasha have become so frequent. Pakistan was not created with the idea of giving languages such as Bangla, Sindhi, Punjabi the opportunity of proclaiming their presence. It was created for Biharis like us." I go into deeper detail with Samad's novels, and then I look at Atia. I don't think there is time. I look at Atia Hussain's novel, Sunlight on a Broken Column, which is about a household in the United Provinces. It's kind of an old land-owning household, which is at the center of the plot. And here, what's interesting in that novel is that it does not try to paint pre-partition India as this utopian land where Hindus and Muslims existed in perfect harmony throughout. She says that the Muharram and Holi were always fought with tension, and there was always underlying currents of suspicion. It's just that partition and what followed later kind of escalated that kind of animosity and distrust, but it also ends on sort of a hopeful note. There are a few short stories which I won't go. I'll just conclude. The novels and short stories discussed in this paper perhaps present only a small portion of an enormous literary corpus that deals with the theme of partition-related migration, homelessness, memories of the original homeland and exile. However, what needs to be kept in mind while reading such texts is that they provide an alternative insight into history. The characters of these tales may only have existed in the creative imaginations of the writers, but the experiences they go through and the memories that they can feel could well have been the real individuals, of any real individuals who lived through those traumatic times. But literature, to a large extent, has the capacity to achieve what political discourse never can, to defy the urge to lay the blame that keeps the embers of animosity smoldering. In fact, as has been pointed out by Mushrif Hassan, I quote, "Only literature can truly evoke the sufferings of the innocent, whose pain is more universal and ultimately a vehicle of a more honest reconciliation with the past and of coming to terms with the present."
in any of the novel, do you see that day of deliverance or day of that sort of as a watermark in intercommunal relationships with reference to Bihar or Bengal?
I do not see that, it doesn't figure that prominently in the novels, but then I'm a historian, I have also looked at the archival record, and there the day of deliverance is very important, because it's kind of is marked as the day when Pakistan became more of a reality for a lot of the provinces, Muslim minority provinces. So, but it doesn't form a major plot point in Abdul Samad's novel.
This was colonial migration to Gangarian system with special reference to Sri Lanka from 1900 to 1940. Indians have been sojourning abroad since ancient times. There is historical evidence of Indian influenced colonies and kingdoms in Southeast Asia. The most notable of the being the 15th century AD Srivijaya Empire in Indonesia. Besides Southeast Asia, Indian cultural influence is also known to have existed in Afghanistan, Tibet, and part of China. Indian scholars and entrepreneurs were in contact with their counterparts in Indonesia and the Hellenic world. Early Indian immigration, however, did not result in any significant permanent settlement overseas. In contrast to ancient immigration, modern immigration from India was wholly British creation. It began in 1834 when slavery was abolished in the British Empire. Labour was needed to work on sugar plantations in the various British colonies. Without dependable supplies of labour, survival of plantations would have been extremely difficult. Consequently, the British colonists followed the practice of Latin American and Cuban colonists who were importing Chinese indentured labour from the Portuguese settlements of Macau. Indian labourers had already been found useful in various colonies, whereas slave and convicted prisoners they were employed in public works, hotbeds, offices and jails. The expansion of the capitalist world economy under the aegis of imperialism necessitated colossal demand for labour, especially for labour-intensive plantation or mining work. Such a demand could not be fulfilled by local available labour forces in the region of expansion. The problem of labour scarcity was further augmented by the abolition of slavery throughout the empire. Slavery in the British Empire was abolished on August 1, 1934 through an act of parliament. An abolition was subsequently followed by the French and Dutch. The main anomaly of the indentured system was the vast desertion of immigrant labourers in the very initial stage of their contacts. In this disparate situation, the plantation lobby and the colonial government had no option but to explore an alternate system of labour mobilization that might guarantee the availability of a reliable labour force for a longer tenure. The modus operandi of Kangani system. Historically, 5 distinctive patterns of Indian immigration can be identified. 1. Indentured labour migration. 2. Kangani or Maistri labour migration. 3. Free or passage migration. 4. Brain drain or voluntary migration to the metropolitan countries of Europe, North America and Oceania. And 5. Labour migration to West Asia. Among them, the research discussed the Kangani and Maistri system yesterday. The Kangani system of recruitment was used to supply South Indian labour to Malaysia, Sri Lanka and Maistri system to Burma. The word Kangani is an Anglicized form of the Tamil word. Kangani meaning overseer, foreman. Under this system, a Kangani, himself an Indian immigrant, used to recruit the police in India, paying them in advance for expenses. In official circles, it was felt that a labour migration and work regime based on close knit relationships and dependence would ensure great level of subordination, thus restraining the labourers from desertion. They opted for a kingship-based system of labour mobilization and a discipline already practiced in southern part of India. This was known as Kangani or Maistri, depending upon the region. In Tamil-speaking regions, it was as a Kangani system, and in Telugu region, it was the Maistri system. These systems in turn were essentially based on close ties of the village, caste and kingship between the recruiters and the recruits. As Arkejan has noted, family, kin and caste ties were preserved and respected much more in the Kangani system than under indenture. The Kangani system was adopted for a labour mobilization, primarily from Tamil Nadu to Malaysia and Ceylon. Under this system, Kanganis often overseas or labourers already working in the colony were deputed by planters to go and mobilize more labourers who might then immigrate to the plantations. These Kanganis were supposed to be men of clout and relatively high social standing in their localities. It was hoped they would be able to pursue people from their villages and extend families to immigrate. The immigrant started estate life in debt to the Kangarian planter. This was inherited in coastal advanced system which was used in conjunction with Kangan system to recruit labor. As planters agent, the Kangani was provided with advance to secure laborers, but this advance was debited depending on the estate workers that he brought over. If the laborers need course cap, it will be provided but will be debited against him. This was his initial debt, even though many Kangas tended to spend only a fraction of the cost advance on the migrant laborers, keeping the bulk of it from them. The main was that Kangani was the leader and the representative of laborers, composing his gang and heartfully bound them to him in every conceivable way. He was their bank and spokesman. This was the position of unwholesome power, who were accepted by the immigrants themselves. It would appear that it was his natural rank as leader and middleman rather than the creditor which resulted of power. The planters themselves railed at the system and felt that it would place them in power of the Kanganis and argued that as creditors they were placed in an awkward position. Much has been made of the fact that immigrants will come onto their estate life in debt. The question hinges on the amounts of their advance, their wages and how much they were able to save per month. According to planter, majority of these labor came over, deeply indebted to the estate, and they often found difficult in repaying the advances, though planters rarely charge interest. Even more significant is a Kanga's admission quite incidentally that most of the hands on his estate were in his debt, but these views bear examination. Obviously, these travelling advances differ since much depended on the size of the gang recruit and how much money the immigrant desired to leave behind for his relatives in India. 4 to 6 rupees should be sufficient for his journey. It would seem that the advance was seldom under 10 rupees and 10 to 15 can be taken as an normal sum. The immigrant laborers recruited from Ceylon plantations were predominantly Tamil agrarian communities from the district of Tiruchirappalli, Tanjore, Ramnad, Salem, Madurai, South Arcot, North Arcot, Pudukottai, Chengalpat, Tingalberi and Coimbatore. The majority of the immigrants Ceylonese plantations belong to Parayan, Pallan, Vellala and Pallan caste of Tamil Nadu. Depressed castes constitute nearly 30% of this labor force. The Kangan system was short-term, usually 30 days. Contact was generally verbal rather than written. The laborers were free to leave whenever they wished. Ceylon plantation laborers had to pay the cost of their transportation recruitment, binding them to their employees through other means. Food, clothing, transit of the recruits during the trips to Ceylon were paid by coastal advance secured by Kanganis. Okay, we'll skip this. Coffee production was very labor intensive and seasonal in nature. The harvesting season lasted for 4 to 5 months. In the beginning, local laborers worked in the clearing of forests but were not interested in working as coolies. Coffee planters turned to the south hinterlands for recruitment labor. There are reports of about 10,000 South Indian laborers working in the coffee plantations during the 1820s and 40s. Most of the immigrants returned after the harvest season over. Initially, the plants sent their own men to recruit labor. Many immigration to Ceylon are small, privately owned sailing vessels and thus neither made use of the newly established infrastructure nor entered into the official statistics. At no point of time immigration was did the Ceylon government intervene of some support. In conclusion, I will skip this. The immigrants were largely Hindus, about 80%. The remainers being Muslims, Christians and Sikhs. The regional linguistic composition of immigrants was dominated by Tamils, followed by Malayalis, Telugus and North Indians. The main was that the Kangani was the leader and the representative of the laborers, composing his gang and artfully bound them to him in every conceivable way. He was the bank and spokesman. This was a position of unwholesome power, so accepted by the immigrants themselves. It would appear that it was his natural rank as leader and the middleman rather than that of the creator which helped him to power. Thank you.
Hi, welcome and good afternoon to all of this, especially the professors and the chaplains and scholars of this court. The event of The year of 1905 was thought to be very important in the Southeast Asian political history. First one, in the Russo-Japanese War, Russia was defeated, but Japan was won. Then, 1905, in this year, in India, the partition of India by Lord Curzon. This event occupied the political importance in the political history of Russia and also in India. Even also we can say that the Southeast Asian political situation. Then we can say how it was important. First one, the defeat of Russia boosted the proletarians of Russia. Secondly, the victory of Japan boosted the Asians. Thirdly, it was the both incident boosted the Indian nationalism. Let us get into the subject. These viral changes were cast in the Indian nationalism by the Russo-Japanese War, in which Russia fell. In the same year, the proletarian revolution occupied in Russia was also quelled. But these events impacted the political information for political nationalism and political leaders of India like Lalpal Bal, also Subramania Bharati, inspired these events. Particularly on the proletarian revolution, thereafter he inculcated his curiosity towards Russian political scenario. Eventually, his enthused zeal on Russian revolution made him into some predeterminating capacities, especially on the evil-tendered kingship of the Tsar, and proletarians led him to enact a vote for the welcoming of the Russian revolution. The employing methodology is recording the primary sources from the works of the TMC Raghunathan letters to the Moscow University, the Orientalist department. Then journals of Soviet land and the press releases of Indo-Soviet government embassies and research papers, the works of the Subramania Bharati. As Rome was not built in a day, just like Bharati also did not reveal the facts in a short time. It was also a long process. He observed the regular important political changes day-to-day happenings. As journalist, he gave the facts to the public by the filtering from the facts. In 1905, he blessed the Russian Revolution as Lord Shiva may be blessed to the righteous efforts of our Russian comrades. Then his guru, Sister Nivedita, also sermonized him with the favor of the Russian Revolution tender. It was also the desire of the Swami Vivekananda also. His prediction notes on the Russia as, in the last week, we have communicated by the telegrams, confirmed our fear. If there are riots started in many places, then we know how long the state he should be. We can observe that after political chaos was held in Russia, then he predicted that the Duma will be dissolved because the Duma members very seriously and steadily promulgated the reformations. He received news on the political changes in Russia from three ways. From his friend MPT Acharya, who was one among the founders of the Indian Communist Party in Tashkent. He also met Lenin in the year of 1919. Second, Bharati read many international journals like American Gaelic, which was published by the Irelandians in America, and the Sociologist, which was published by the Shyamji Krishan Verma, who founded the Socialist Party in London. And the third, as the journalist, he was himself had international political changes also. He analyzed critically the political events of the international scenario, also about the various political institutions, particularly in England and France. His predictions continuously as following. Hitherto, the Russian Duma members have done the reformations one another, one entirely hostile to the king. Hitherto, Russian government methods, so that made the scholars believe that the activities of Duma members will create angry on Duma. It will be paved the way for the destruction of the Duma. Then Bharati also worried about the dissolution of Duma. It will lead to its end. His further views on that the destruction of Duma will be an important seed to the deluge of the tyranny of the Russian king and his uncivilized kingship. These predeterminations were predicted by Bharati before 11 years of the fall of the Russian throne. The insurance of Bharati reveals that great revolution will be occurred in Russia. Number 1. It happened after 11 years. Then the fast reformation of Duma will lead it to its end. Likewise, Duma was destructed by the king. Then, if Duma destructed, it will lead to the end of the Tsar tyranny. The reviews of these predictions may, as his first prediction has taken 11 years to be happened. Secondly, the second prediction happened immediately. The second prediction saw the seeds for the first prediction. Then the sincere examination of this prediction will be astonished us deeply. While the world politics was travelled very weakly, the foresightedness of Subramania Bharati predicted forward him for next 11 years. He predetermined the occupation of the Great Revolution and its results. He published these messages in his journal India and Swadeshi Mission under the headlines of the dilution of Duma on the dated 24/7/1906. The same it was published in the Journal of India and dated 28/7/1906. Then let us go to this predetermined that the Tsar tyranny will not be existed for a long time. The injustice in front of the justice could not be alive in the earth.
Please
Continue. Okay, sir. And also continue. These enthusiastic Russian political changes pushed him to the unworthy war, New Russia, as the fall of the Tsar, as the fall of the Himalayas, and the fall of the throne as the hit of the thunder on the wall. He celebrated the fall of the Tsar fall as Kali Yuga and arise as the Krita Yuga, the golden age and the iron age. The another place predicted in his hitherto the rare chaos and everything in the kingship victories, but each time the power of revolutions increased. Likewise, in the 1905 proletarians led to the revolutions strengthened their mighty. While talking about the mighty of the Duma, he has taken the King Nicholas II if refused to convene Duma, the throne will be shaken. If he is suppressing the riots of chaos with his iron hands, it will lead to his end. We can conclude like this. His thoughts on the, as documented in this article, events, the predeterminations of the Bharati are not soothsaying. It is the result of his wisest political knowledge and acquired through his in-depth study of the international political scenario. Then, as journalist, he criticized seriously every political changes in the world. Particularly, he kept his 5 senses
with the proletarian movements in Russia. In true sense, his articles, which were published in his various journals, contributions as major authenticated sources to reveal the neo-political thoughts of Bharati. The thoughts on social ideologies with the democratic nature exposed him, his political foresightedness, his unequal concept induced him to philosophy. Let us demolish the world, even if a man left without food. That's all. Thank you.
The title of my paper is The Persian Gulf and British-Indian Strategy Towards Russia. So according to my understanding, the paper should be ideally in West Asia, but it still gives me a good opportunity by presenting it in Europe, so I kind of get it done today. What I'm going to talk about is basically the British-Russian relations in regard to Persian Gulf primarily, but what I'm trying to bring in is the aspect of the British-Indian officials as against the British officials in London. So I'm trying to kind of pose a statement by saying that British-Indian officials followed a different strategy towards dealing with the security of India as compared to the the officials in London that they did. And here I bring in Britain and Russia, in particular relation with the Persian Gulf. Excuse me. In the 18th century, Britain and Russia were two significant powers that aimed at extending their access and authority beyond the limits of their territories. Formal diplomatic relations between Britain and Russia were established in 1553. By the 18th century, the two had become great empires, and by the 19th century, they had turned into each other's rivals in Asia. If Britain was a maritime power, Russia was a continental power. Relations of both these empires were largely defined by their interests in Central Asia and other Asian regions. Britain's primary objective remained safeguarding the jewel in her crown, of course India. Russia kept in view access to strategic ocean waterways, whether through the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf or the Pacific. Russia's interest in Asia in the 19th century heavily impacted British policies in the region. By the last quarter of the 19th century, Russia had fast consolidated its position in Persia, where British influence declined at the same time. Besides, Russia's keen interest in the Balkans and Central Asia from Afghanistan and Tibet had brought it closer to the frontiers of British Indian Empire and along the routes to India. British interest in the Persian Gulf, which is the region beyond India, had started much at the time when Britain established itself in India in 1613. 2 years later, in 1615, the directors of East India Company sent a ship from Surat to Jask, which was the site of the first mercantile settlement made by the East India Company on the Persian soil. It was one of British India's earliest interactions with the Persian Gulf. The setting up of English factory at Jask in 1616 thus signaled the Anglo-Persian alliance. So this was the first part of it, but 2 centuries later the situation has changed, because in the decades following the Crimean War, which is 1853 to 1856, Russia had embarked on political and economic penetration in the northern Persia in the last quarter of the 19th century. As J.G. Lorimer, the British diplomat, historian and administrator stated, Russia had, and I quote, Russia had established a position, power and prestige in the Persian court. Russia exercised a powerful control over Persian affairs and required to be consulted on any adjustment in Persian political reforms, unquote. The importance of maintaining British influence in Persia came from 3 distinct requirements. Geostrategic position, as it was placed midway between Europe and India. The British telegraphic lines that passed through Persia, as during the 1857 revolt, the need for direct telegraphic communication with India was seriously and increasingly felt, and of course it being used as a region to attack or control India. Much attention then was paid to the news in Russian newspaper, the Novo Vremya, which was on 1st December 1888, the news report, on Russian interest in subordination of Khorasan in northeast Iran in reference to military operations against India, if at all the event occurred. But the most important thing was Russia had thwarted every effort of Britain in Persia. In the last quarter of the 19th century, Germany and France also had gained headway in the matters of business, trade and finance in the Persian Gulf, causing enough concerns to the government of India. And this is where the government of India primarily wanted. I once again quote J.G. Lorimer, who insisted that Russian movements in Khorasan and Sistan were designed to shake the influence of Great Britain in South Persia, to dispute the control of Indian seas, and to secure a base for naval operations in the east, and the advance through Persia to the Gulf was the probability, he says, and he says, the safety, and I quote, the safety of India, which is the first duty of Great Britain, the Pax Britannica that now reigns in the southern seas, unquote. The later years brought sweeping changes in the region, and British colonial authorities feared that the consolidation of Russian influence in the Persian Gulf area the emergence of Russian, French or German bases on the banks, and the shrinking of British influence in the countries bordering India would appear to the Indian public and Indian national bourgeois as clear evidence of Great Britain's military and political weakness, with all ensuing consequences. It was argued that such was the composition of that section of the British ruling classes who feared that Indians might think that the Britain is no longer the power, that they actually always thought of turning the Red Sea, the western part of Indian Ocean, particularly the Gulf, which eventually had turned as the British League. The British and Indian authorities asserted their position in decision making as the London authorities continued to remain driven by matters of Europe and relations with the powers of the region. The foreign policy of India was an actively reserved area within the purview of the Viceroy of India, assisted by his cabinet men in the foreign department. Some of these had immense impact on the way the decisions of the government of India were framed. For example, Alfred Lyle, earlier a Home Secretary for the Government of India, was appointed as a Foreign Secretary in Lord Lytton's administration. As a Foreign Secretary, his main occupation was the Northwest Frontier Province. He considered the frontier as a question of border management and, in larger aspect, important for defense of India against the attack by any foreign power, particularly he was referring to Russia. For him, a firm understanding with Russia would have the problem of the frontier. In matters of Indian defense, there were sharp differences of opinions where some suggested that the British government in India should benefit out of the railways and new modes of communication, and thus no harm would come to its defense, whereas Russia would have to wrestle out the problems in Asia and deal with the different terrain and people in Central Asia. But the others believed that the Russian approach to the frontiers of India would prove disastrous. Lord Lytton was a conservative viceroy of India, and he believed in the latter, and Russian threat remained an important factor in Lytton's foreign policy of India. But perhaps no one played the threat as earnestly as Lord Curzon did. He was the viceroy 1899 to 1905. Russia's advance in the Persian Gulf worried Curzon to no end, and he spent a large time of his tenure devising the would-be ways of resisting Russian influence. He had been suspicious of Russian designs and more insistent on British domination in Persia than anyone like Salisbury or Lansdowne. He quoted earlier examples of Russian interest towards India. Lord Curzon's keenness on making the Persian Gulf as a secure space for India's external links and to keep the Russian power at bay under the pretext of its interest in Persia encouraged the initiative for the visit to the Gulf. In 1903, he was the first viceroy to ever to do so, to visit the Persian Gulf. Viceroy Curzon had more than once reiterated the point. On the question of whether Russia should be let into the Gulf, Curzon attacked the pro-Russian approach of the British government that suggested a port for Russia in the Gulf, which he believed would end Persian independence. Curzon was to comment, and I quote, "I should regard the concession of a port upon Gulf to Russia by any power as a deliberate insult to Great Britain, as a wanton rupture of status quo, and as an international provocation of war," unquote. The Russian-Persian situation was differently handled by London and by Calcutta. Then Calcutta. London believed that Russia was in a position to dominate Persia, whereas Curzon believed that depended on the quantum of resistance by the British. Authorities in India could not envisage a policy that was detrimental to the concerns of the British Empire. In fact, its concern for the policy was keeping in mind that it was an important and integral part of British imperial structure. Curzon and Lord Kitchener from India followed a policy against Russia. Lord Lansdowne, as Governor General and Viceroy of India earlier, had been unhappy about certain prospects, but had encouraged a firm stand against Russia generally. Between 1903 to 1907, the British fear of a Russian threat to the Gulf gradually abated, and that of German designs in the regions had steadily increased. The spheres of British and Russian interest and disinterest in Persia had to be defined to check Russian influence in Persia as well as in the Gulf. The Anglo-Russian Convention was being discussed now, and it was necessary to identify the size and extent of British sphere that involved in the Persian Gulf. Foreign Secretary Edward Grey had more trouble with the Indian government than with the government back home. He did not consider Russia having access to the Gulf, and under pressure from Government of India, which complained about the size and the sphere, at the last minute, they tried to get a clause added recognizing the British interest in the maintenance of status quo in Gulf, lest its omission, as the Government of India thought, and I quote, would seriously affect the popularity of the agreement when concluded. I am talking about the Anglo-Russian Convention that happened. The Anglo-Russian Agreement of 31st August 1907 identified the zone of influence for Britain and Russia in Persia. It ended the Great Game in Asia. The Anglo-Russian Convention of 31st August 1907 was never fully received by the government of India, who insisted that the matter of vital interest to India was dealt without consulting the government of India and had conveyed the disagreement to London authorities regarding the same. The London cabinet overruled emphatically, and they said the so-called Indian government could not be granted to conduct the foreign policy on its own. The conclusion of this agreement, along with a few other developments on the international front regarding checking the growing arms trade, made a change in the politics of the Persian Gulf. Russia's intention in the Gulf had remained a consistent issue for the policymakers in India. Now, I come to the last part of it. Was this threat a real one or an imagined one, or was it really overplayed by the government of India? Lord Curzon had argued that, and I quote, neither Russian statesmen nor Russian generals are foolish enough to dream of the conquest of India. They do most seriously contemplate the invasion of India. The purpose instead was, he added, to keep England quiet in Europe by keeping her employed in Asia is the sum and substance of Russian policy, unquote. The great game may have ended the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907. But the February Revolution and later the October Revolution of 1917 brought different dimension of Russian impact on British India. The Russian threat perception was an important dimension of British India's policy towards security of their Indian empire. Russia's geographical reach to India, its status in the Persian Empire, and the activities in the Persian Gulf kept the Indian officials alert in the 19th century. Even after the agreement of 1907, averting the Russian reach and possible attack on India remained the concerns of British India's policy towards Russia. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Abhinav, and I am a PhD student at the Department of East Asian Studies. My paper is titled Madness to the Method, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Planning for Japan during the Second World War. At the outset, I would like to make it clear that generally we believe that creating foreign policy, especially for the war effort, is a very systematic and methodical process. But through this paper, I would try to problematize this generalization and challenge the argument that planning for the Second World War, planning for Japan during the Second World War was not as simple as it seems. So, during this, for my paper, I have considered the role of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the then President of United States of America. So, understanding the foreign policies of Franklin Roosevelt is a very troublesome undertaking, because first of all, he never gave clear ideas, and secondly, he was not a specialist on East Asia. He often wanted that his planners and policy makers should create a basket of plans from which he could pick and choose plans that suited his interests or the interest of the country. So, planning for the post-war world during the war did not mean that US had to follow a certain distinct course. It meant that through those plans, if these plans were created during the war, this would ease future choices and decisions for the United States, because Franklin Roosevelt believed that after the end of the First World War, there was this craziness and there was no clear-cut policies that had resulted in a failed peace and ultimately led to the Second World War. So, in the Roosevelt era, I would submit that informal commitments, stereotyped ideas, unpredictable and lopsided discussions with specialists, and contention between the counselors tarnished the long-term policy and planning process. And thus, through this paper, I would like to challenge the preconceived idea that US planning for the war, for the time period, was not totally systematic, and it was not something that was very coherent and cogent. There was some madness to the method. To put forward my views, I will use certain references that I have taken from various diaries of various officials who were at that time in the US government. First of all, we have the paper of Joseph Grew. Joseph Grew was the US ambassador to Japan, and Joseph Grew had submitted that Japan is a very aggressive country and Japan is on the course of attacking China and invading China, and US should certainly take certain steps to check this aggressive nature of Japan. But instead of getting a very clear-cut reply from Franklin Roosevelt, Joseph Drew got the reply, and I would like to quote what Roosevelt replied to Drew, that the problems we face are so vast and interrelated that any attempt even to state them compels one to think in terms of 5 continents and 7 seas. So this was not a very clear-cut reply what Joseph Drew should do. So Joseph Drew in this case was left with nothing to act upon from Washington. The other thing that Roosevelt heavily depended on was that he relied for information not on regular channel or official channels, but he gathered information through irregular channels, which was both good and bad. But as far as policy making and especially during the wartime is concerned, this disregarded the mature and solid information which comes from orderly processes through regular channels. And when Roosevelt used these irregular channels of information, this was often misused by certain officials to further their own personal interests. As the result was that the president was susceptible to fresh ideas introduced by his favorites, and his sources often came up short on specific situations, and as a result he more often than not disregarded the solid information that came through official channels. Roosevelt was generally very less reliant on his official diplomats that were stationed in East Asia, and in fact he had appointed personal emissaries for himself, and he even asked the foreign authorities of different foreign countries in East Asia to contact his personal emissaries directly rather than contacting the official diplomats in those countries. So the result of this was that the existence of informal ambassadors with the command and ear of Roosevelt diluted the power and mission of authorized representatives in East Asia. Then there is this issue of how information flowed through a channel. For example, if a diplomat had to contact Roosevelt in US, first he had to talk to the head of the Division of Far Eastern Affairs, then that information was conveyed to the Secretary of State, and then it finally reached the President of United States of America, that is Roosevelt. But for his personal emissaries, the personal emissaries had a direct line to the President. So for them, the information was not filtered. So what happened due to this was that Roosevelt's inclination for sending individual diplomats gave him perceptions from short-term visits abroad instead of depending on detailed reports from authorities with more involvement in the region, and thus his learning about the nuances of far away distant nations like Japan at that time was based, we can say, was based on hearsay and was not based on adept analysis by officials. Then, as I talked about earlier, that Roosevelt wanted a basket of plans to choose from. So this creation of this basket was also a very troublesome affair, because Roosevelt wanted that his personal emissaries and the official diplomats, both of them should take part in creating this basket of plans. But this led to tension between the officials and the personal emissaries. So, and Roosevelt was very unpredictable. He often took certain foreign policy decisions over dinner. Once he went to meet a British minister, and he committed that we should, in the face of an attack from Japan, both Britain and America should stand together, and US will leave no stone unturned, and he committed his unflinching support to Britain in the war effort if Japan attacks. But he did not inform any of his officials or ministers about what he had committed. He had basically committed the nation to war if there was an attack from Japan, but he did not inform any of his ministers or officials. Later, Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, was informed by the British minister that Roosevelt had made such commitments. Then we should also know about the leadership pattern of Franklin Roosevelt. So the basic leadership pattern of Franklin Roosevelt was that he used to start a squabble between his officials, and then often opted for the Right? And then he often tried to settle it down by resorting to the middle path. So then he generally accepted at first. He accepted the Morgenthau plan over dinner with him, and then we have the incident of Ed Stettinius and James Barnes, where when Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, had resigned, James Barnes was all set to become the new Secretary of State, but he chose Ed Stettinius because Ed Stettinius had agreed that he would not bother Roosevelt in foreign policy creation matters, but he just wanted that the the State Department should be informed of what Roosevelt was doing. He could do anything. The other idea that Roosevelt had in creating policies for Japan was how Roosevelt conceived Japan. Okay, so first of all, Roosevelt had upheld the Exclusion Act of 1924, and through this act, the movement of the Japanese people in US was limited, and Roosevelt was against the intermingling of races, especially when it. Okay. To conclude, I would just say that the line of policy creation was very ambiguous during the Roosevelt era, and ultimately what emerged to be policy for Japan during the Second World War can be said to be an accident of Roosevelt's death, because ultimately he died in 1945.